Hey, it's me, Jenny Lee. I'm here with the next Raw book discussion. This is session 21. This should be video number 22. Let's get started. Would the future content of this book be affected in any way if Carla read the material? Which I had forgotten that Carla wasn't reading the material already. They mentioned that at the beginning of the book in the introduction part, but I totally forgot. Carla didn't even know what the hell they're talking about or what's been happening this whole time. Carla's the whole reason why we're getting all this information, and like she's not reading the information. Wow. Okay. The future communications which we offer through this instrument have no connection with the instrument's mind complex. This is for two reasons. First, the fidelity of the instrument in dedicating its will to the service of the infinite creator. Secondly, the distortion understanding of our social memory complex that the most effective way to communicate material with as little distortion as possible, given the necessity of the words, is to remove the conscious mind complex from the body so that we can communicate without reference to any instrument orientation. So what they're saying is that Carla is so dedicated to bringing forth this information that it's fine. And second, they think that the best way to give the information is to have Carla in a full trance where she's not conscious of what's happening so that her mind doesn't interfere with the information. Which when you're a medium or you're doing like a partial trance, your mind is still working and thinking, and it can get blended together with the consciousness of whatever spirit or entity that you're communicating with. So yes. Do you use your vocabulary or the instrument's vocabulary? We use the vocabulary of the language with which you are familiar. This is not the instrument's vocabulary. However, Carla retains the use of a sufficiently large number of words that the distinction is often without importance. So they're using her word bank, basically, in a language that we can understand, but they're definitely not using it in the way that Carla would talk, clearly. Carla, it does not talk like Ra, but Ra is using the words that Carla knows. Here comes this Puharich guy. This guy, I don't know how I feel about this guy, because every time Dawn asks a question about him, okay. Every time Dawn asks a question about him, he says, and this time he uses he has two different first names. And I guess this is probably his real first name, Andrija. I don't know if the J is a J or a J is an H. But he also goes by Henry, right? So every time that Dawn asks a question about him, the question's always for Puharich. And he's like, later this month, he's going to come visit. I would like to ask this question for him. And it really kind of sounds like this guy is so, like, I can just envision what happens when him and Dawn talk to each other. The Puharich guy's like, hey, you should ask Ra about this for me. And Dawn's such a nice, sweet fella that he's going to be like, okay, I'll ask him. But really, he doesn't want to ask him because he knows that Ra is not going to tell him any information about him. This keeps happening. So I don't know about this fella. I don't get the greatest vibes about him. Can he read the unpublished material? The unpublished healing material? The entity of whom you speak has knowledge of this material in his conscious memory, but somewhat altered. Therefore, it's harmless to allow him to become acquainted with the material. However, we request that Henry be sufficiently prepared by means of meditation, contemplation, or prayer before entering these workings. At present, we have said before, this person is not of proper vibrational distortion. To me, it sounds like Puharich is like a super busy guy who is like trying to do, and he doesn't take time to meditate or get himself properly aligned, and Ra knows all that. So yeah, okay, onward and forward here. There's a certain statement which will allow him to understand who I believe Spectra really was. It seems my duty to remove this knowledge to preserve the same free will that you attempted to preserve by not defining the origin of Spectra, his contact in Israel. So I had to look this all up because I was like, who the hell is Spectra? Contact in Israel? What are you guys talking about? Okay. So it was a little bit hard to find information about this, but I found an article from the 70s about that Uri, the prophet Uri, who could bend spoons and shit. And this is what was in it. Spectra was a voice spoken to Puharich from an extraterrestrial called Huva. And this information, somewhere along the lines, remember some of the information that had come through the contacts of Puharich had correct information about the Council of Nine. And that's really all we know. There was a medium guy who was channeling somebody, an entity, and that guy gave correct information about the Council of Nine. But here it's saying that Puharich has his own person, his voice that's speaking to him, who is called Spectra, but it's somehow coming from a being that's called Huva. It was really confusing. I don't really understand what's happening here. But anyway, Don's asking, can he wants to let Puharich read the information about healing, but he wants to omit the information about Puharich himself or something that has to do with who this Spectra person might be. And Don's asking, should I omit that from the information so that it doesn't mess up with his future or whatever? And Ra says, this is a matter for your discretion. Discretion. So that's weird, because before Ra was like, we can't tell you that. But now he's like, whatever. You do you. Okay. The entities from Maldek were transferred how many years ago? The entities of which you speak underwent several transitions. The first was 500,000 years in your past. At this time, the entities were transformed into a knot. So remember, Maldek is supposed to be a planet that existed between Jupiter and Mars. And it was also referred to as Phaeton, which was a Greek word. The Greeks saw some sort of celestial body in the sky that they called Phaeton. And it's also Maldek. So Maldek, even though the Greeks didn't live 500,000 years ago, there's some part of it that's connected to the Greeks because they had a word for it. Anyway, remember, Maldek was a planet that had intelligent beings on it, and they blew themselves up, and now that planet is our asteroid belt. So it blew up so terribly that it's not even recognizable as a planet anymore. It's a frickin' asteroid belt. Okay. And after that happened, all the entities from that planet were jumbled up into a knot of terrible, horrible, traumatic suffering and sorrow because of what had happened to them and what they had done to themselves. This continued for what you call eons of your time. Those aiding them were repeatedly unable to reach them. So I think the time The years are slightly different when Ra talks about Maldek earlier, because I could have sworn that it was like 100 and some thousand years between when they blew themselves up, became this knot, and then somebody was able to reach them. But this time Ra says it was approximately 200,000 years ago that the Confederation entity was able to release the knot. That's 300,000 years. 300,000 years. So somewhere between 150,000 years to 300,000 years, these poor beings were all jumbled and tangled up in what you would definitely refer to as a hell of trauma and confusion. And they had no planet to live on. They had no bodies to be in. They were a jumbled up mess of mess. And then finally, a Confederation entity was able to relax the knot, of which none had escaped during the planetary annihilation. So every single living thing on that whole planet got sucked up into this knot of trauma. Because I imagine if there was intelligent beings in some sort of physical body, there was other kinds of physical bodies of different types of plants and animals. You know, it wasn't just this one thing. These entities then were transformed again into the inner time or space dimensions and underwent a lengthy healing process. So they finally were reached, they were relaxed, and they started healing. When this was accomplished, these entities were then able to determine the appropriate movement in order to set up conditions for alleviation of their consciousnesses of their actions. So they felt like they had this horrible karma inflicted upon themselves because of what they had done to their own planet. And they had to come up with a way to alleviate their own guilt. So then it was 46,000 years ago. So it took them from 200,000 years ago to 46,000 years ago. So over 100,000 years of healing and figuring out what they were going to do. These entities chose to incarnate on Earth. The no incarnation occurred before this master 75,000 year cycle of Maldek entities, correct? So nobody incarnated into a third density on Earth from another place, even Maldek, 75,000 years ago. Were there any of these entities then incarnated in second density before the 75,000 year cycle? No. These particular entities were incarnate in the third density, the inner planes, undergoing the healing process, approaching realization of their actions. Let's see. So at the start of the 75,000 year cycle, we know that a quarantine was set up, and that the guardians were aware of infringements on free will that would occur if they didn't set up. And at this time, correct? Partially correct. The incorrectness is as follows. Those entities whose third density experienced upon the red planet, Mars, so remember Mars and Maldek are two different things, experience upon the red planet was brought to a close prematurely were aided genetically while being transferred to this third density. This, although done in its desire to aid, was seen as an infringement upon the free will. The light quarantine, which consists of the guardians or gardeners, as you may call them, which would be in effect, thus was intensified. So they did feel like they were infringing upon the free will of the entities of Mars, but they felt like the need was greater for them to have bodies to incarnate into because they didn't get to finish out their cycle. And there was a light quarantine, but they intensified it after the Mars entities got here. When the 75,000 year cycle, the lifespan was 900 years. What was the process or mechanism of reincarnation at that time? Good question, Dawn, good question. Query is more complex than most. The incarnation pattern of the beginning third density begins in darkness and forgetting. This is the only plane of forgetting. It is necessary for the third density entity to forget, so the mechanisms of confusion or free will may operate upon newly individuated consciousness complex. So, this says that when an entity begins the third density, they have to go through a darkness of forgetting, because it doesn't work unless there's confusion, so they can choose things through free will. But good news is, this is the only plane of forgetting. The only time you forget everything is during the third density. Thus, the beginning entity is one in all innocence, oriented towards animalistic behavior, using other selves only as extensions of self for the preservation of all self. So at the beginning of the third density, they're still kind of acting like animals. They're not really seeing themselves as a self. Or no, they're using other selves as an extension of self, because they all need to survive, basically. The entity becomes slowly aware that it has needs that are not animalistic and are useless for survival. So remember, might have been last session or the session before, that part of being in this third density reality is having the desire, the need, the want to create things that we don't need for survival. It's like part of the third density that's required. It's like a requirement. So here are some of the needs that they realize that they want, that they need, that don't have to do with survival. Companionship, laughter, beauty, and to know the universe about it. These are the beginning needs. So as they move from an animalistic behavior to more of a third density type of thought and consciousness, they need, even though they don't need it for survival, they need companionship, laughter, beauty, and to know the universe about it. All those things are beautiful. Beautiful. As the incarnations begin to accumulate, further needs are discovered. Trade, love, to be loved, and to the need to elevate animalistic behaviors to a more universal perspective. So trading with each other to get things that they need for survival or not, love, be loved, and then realizing that there's a more universal aspect, or I would think of this as social acceptances between other people. During the first portion of the third density, incarnations are automatic and often rapid upon the cessation of energy complex of the physical vehicle. There's a small need to review or heal the experiences of the incarnation. The energy centers begin to be activated to a higher extent. More of the content of experience during the incarnation deals with the lessons of love. So during the very first part of the third density cycle, the reincarnations are automatic. They go from one body to another with little to no time in between, because there's no need to review or heal. But as they experience love, and all of the love things become activated, they need more time in between incarnations. It's lengthened to give appropriate attention to review and heal experiences of a previous incarnation. At some point in the third density, the green ray energy center, which remember is the heart chakra, becomes activated, and incarnation ceases to be automatic. So when your green ray heart chakra becomes activated in a physical body because of love, then you stop automatically incarnating. And you got to have more time in between to review and heal. Because I guess if you're never really experiencing love, you can't experience a true hurt. You know? The light and the dark, right? The light and the dark. If you don't have a love, you don't have a hurt. Not that you wouldn't have other, physical hurts, but anyway, next. I'm assuming the entity can decide when he needs to reincarnate for the benefit of his own learning, and does he also select his parents? Yes. Correct. Correct. So after the heart chakra is activated because of experiences with love and lessons with love, then you got to have more time in between, and you get to choose who you're going to be and where you're going to be, and you get to choose your own parents. So remember, people, I would say the majority of you chose those parents for good or bad. Okay. At this time, near the end, what percentage of entities approximately are incarnating or making their own choices? At this time in our cycle, what percentage are incarnating and making their own choices? So in 1981, only 54%. What? This information is mind-boggling because we have these feelings, thoughts, and preconceptions of what we think reincarnation is. And I think a lot of people in the woo-woo world would say that when there's this whole theory and thought about a soul contract. You guys know what I'm talking about? Where before you come into a body, you have pretty much, for the most part, predetermined what was going to happen before you got there, and that you essentially sign this soul contract. Whether you actually sign it or not is probably not here nor there, but that you choose the stuff, you choose it. You choose your parents, you choose where, you choose when, you choose what. You even choose how. Whether the stuff can stays that way or not is not necessarily true because of free will and forgetting all the stuff that you chose before you came in, So I would say most people in the spiritual world right now would say that everybody gets to do that. But just like we learned in yesterday's session, that a lot of people are still in a perpetual childhood of spirituality. If you're in a perpetual childhood of spirituality, you probably don't get to choose. This all makes sense. Children don't get to choose what they want to do. They're still children. So if a soul is still in this early phase of the third density, that they're not choosing shit. They're just coming in as quick as they can to try to learn as many things as possible because they haven't activated their heart chakra, and they haven't experienced enough lessons of love. It goes completely against what we think about as reincarnation, but to me it feels completely right. And it feels completely true. So in 1981, 41 years ago, not a lot of time in the span of time here, only 54% of people were making their own choices before they were reincarnated. That's it. 54. This brings up a whole lot of other issues with what we think about in the spiritual world also. Because even and this is something I've been kind of struggling with, and now I'm going to get off topic and this video is going to be really long. But something that I've been thinking about is watching all these ghost hunting shows and whatnot. Somebody will go to a really old place and they'll just assume that there's entities there that are from the original time. But hear me out here. If what this information is saying is true, 54% of people are not really having a lot of wait time in the spirit world. They're quickly coming back. They're quickly coming back. Now, this could bring up a lot of, this is a slippery slope into terribleness because that would suggest that some of y'all's loved ones you think are on the other side might not be there anymore. They might have come back already. Which, if you really study reincarnation in the present time, you find out that that's happening. Because it'll be like some old lady's husband who died in 30, 40 years ago. And all of a sudden there's a little boy, halfway across the country who says that he was that lady's husband. And damned if it wasn't. They already came back. So I'm not saying everybody's loved ones aren't where they think they are, because I do kind of also feel that a lot of times we wait for each other when we get there. Like our little soul family, our family group, our friends group, that because there's always free will, right? So wouldn't you at least be able to say, hey, I know I have to go back soon, but I would really like to wait for this person and that person to get here before I make it exit? I don't know. I have no idea. This is so much. This one little bit of information brings up so many questions and more theories and more thoughts and interpretations. So once again, one answer has led to, this time, probably about 50 more questions. But let's just go back to the facts of what Ra has said here, and you can decide whether it's factual or not. 54% of people that pass on in 1981 are getting to choose their reincarnation specs for the next one, which means that 56% of people in 1981 are not. They're just coming right back. Woo. Okay. I love how, once again, let's remember, Don is sitting in a session that he knows can only last X number of minutes, and he's having to quickly ask question after question. But I really love how sometimes, like, Ra will say something either that's really confusing or is like very profound, and Don just is like, thank you, and next question. It's like he doesn't have time to think about it right then. During the first 25,000 year cycle, was there any industrial development at all, such as machines and stuff? Using the term machine to the meaning of which you ascribe, the answer is no. But there was various implements of wood and rock used in order to obtain food and used in an aggressive manner. So we had like clubs and rocks and stuff to kill critters so we could eat. At the end of the 25,000 year cycle, was there any physical change that occurred rapidly like that which occurs at the 75,000 year cycle? Or is this just an indexing time for a harvest period? There was no change except that, according to intelligent energy, or what you may term physical evolution, which suited the physical complexes of the environment, this being of the color of the skin due to the area of the sphere which entities lived, the gradual growth of peoples due to the improved intake of foodstuffs. So people's skin color starts to change, and there's more people. Okay. Then at the end of the first 25,000 year period, I'm guessing the Guardians discovered that there was no harvest of either positive or negative. What happened? There was no action taken except to remain aware of the possibility of a calling for help or understanding among the entities of this density. The Confederation is concerned with the preservation of the conditions conducive to learning, thus, for the most part, revolves around the primal distortion of free will. So they didn't do anything, they just kept watching because of free will. Then the Confederation gardeners did nothing, I'm assuming until the plants of the garden called them for help. Correct? Correct. When did the first call occur? It occurred 46,000 years ago with Maldek. These entities were aware of their need for rectifying the consequences of their action and were in some confusion in an incarnate state as to the circumstances of their incarnation, the unconscious being aware, the conscious being quite confused. This created a calling. The Confederation sent light and love to these entities. So, 46,000 years ago, So remember, 46,000 years ago, the entities of Maldek decided to become incarnated. But remember, in a third density, we forget everything. We forget when we come in to a physical body. So 46,000 years ago, all these entities of Maldek start incarnating on Earth. And it's saying that some were in a state of confusion as to the circumstances of their incarnation. The unconscious were not aware of the incarnation, but the conscious people were really confused. And that created a calling for the Confederation to come help. How did they send light and love? They dwell within the Confederation planetary entities, for their planetary spheres do nothing but send love and light as pure streamings to those who call. This is not in the form of conceptual thought, but pure and undifferentiated love. So it's a streaming of love, but not in the form of thought. Did the law of one require equal time given to the self-service oriented group? It wasn't necessary due to the orientation of the entities. What was their orientation? The orientation of these entities was such that the aid of the Confederation was not perceived. So it didn't matter whether they were negative or positive. They didn't know the Confederation was happening. Well, the Confederation's aid was happening. Since it was not perceived, it was not necessary to balance. Correct? Correct. What is necessary to balance? What is necessary to balance is opportunity. When there is ignorance, there is no opportunity. When there exists a potential, then each opportunity shall be balanced. This balancing caused not only the positive and negative orientations of those suffering aid, but also the orientation of those requesting aid. So if they're completely ignorant to the stuff, it doesn't matter, because there's no way that they would possibly know or have an opportunity to change anything. It's when there exists a potential that each opportunity shall be balanced. This balancing caused by not only the positive and negative orientations, but those requesting the aid. Okay, I think I kind of got that. When was the first contact of the Orion group? 60,000 years ago. They attempted. The first attempt in the second major cycle. Now working in the second 25,000 years. The group, so remember 60,000 years ago, they had tried to contact, but it did nothing. So the Orion group next attempted in more fertile territory 3,600 years ago. In other words, there was no attempt 46,000 years ago by the Orion group for the Maldek peoples. No. Correct. As we progress into the next second 25,000 year cycle, was this the period of Lemuria? Incorrect. However, those who had escaped the destruction of Lemuria by natural catastrophe were thus of Lemurian background, continued their learned teachings at locations ranging from your South America onward through the Americas as you know them, and continuing over what was at that time a bridge which no longer exists. There were those in what you would call Russia. Humans think they know everything because right now our general consensus of how the Native Americans got to the Americas was that they traveled from Asia across the Bering Land Strait from Russia to what would now be Alaska, or right? Is it Alaska? Where it's like, way, way up there. Anyway. And that they came down. Ra is saying is the opposite. So Lemuria is supposed to be in the Pacific Ocean. It gets destroyed. The majority of them come to the Americas. And then they move up through South America into North America and across the Bering Land Strait into Russia. That's what Ra says. This is going to make a lot of people real upset. I'm not even going to tell Frost Giant about this part because he will argue to the death. But according to Ra says, no, it happened into South America, up through Central America and North America, and then they went to Russia. How interesting. This was approximately 50,000 years ago. So how many years ago did Lemuria suffer its catastrophe? 50,000 years ago. The origins being approximately 53,000 years ago, the damage being completed in the last small cycle of the first master cycle. Okay. Did you mean to say master or major? The appropriate sound vibration complex is major. So the first major cycle. Then did the ending in the first major cycle have something to do with the destruction of Lemuria, or did it just happen to occur at the end of the cycle? Good question, Dawn. There is a confluence of energies at the ending of a major cycle. This encouraged what was already an inevitable adjustment in the movement of the surfaces of your planetary sphere. So remember, Lemuria didn't blow themselves up. That's Atlantis. Lemuria sunk into the sea from natural causes. And Ra's saying that it was an inevitable adjustment because of what was happening on our planetary surfaces. So, Don says, next question. In the second 25,000 major cycle, in the second 25,000 year major cycle, was there any great civilization that developed? No great societies during this cycle. There was some advancement among those Deneb who had chosen to incarnate as a body in China. So remember that the Deneb constellation is where the souls of Lemuria originally came from. So this is saying that I don't really know what it's saying. It kind of sounds like Ra is saying that some Lemurian souls decided to incarnate in China. But there's no plural here. There's a plural and a not plural. There was some advancement among those of Deneb. Among those of Deneb. Those means more than one. Who chose to incarnate as a body. So it makes it sound like there's some multiple souls that incarnate in one body. Maybe that's just an incorrect use of the vocabulary. I don't know. Anyway, no matter what, some Lemurians, it looks like, incarnated in China. There were appropriately positive steps in activating the green ray energy complex, the heart chakra, and many portions of your planetary sphere, including the Americas. Planetary sphere. I said splane. Splane is not a word. Sphere is, including the Americas. The continent, which you call Africa, the island of which is Australia, and in India, as well as various scattered peoples. So they were trying to get the people's heart chakra activated in Americas, Africa, Australia, and India, and other places. None of these became what you would name great, as the greatness of Lemuria or Atlantis is known to you during the formation of strong social complexes. And in this case, in the case of Atlantis, very great technological understanding. So even though they're activating people's heart chakras, nothing serious societal happens, that we would consider greatness. However, in the South American area of your planetary sphere, there grew a great vibrational distortion towards love. These entities were harvestable at the end of the second major cycle without ever having formed strong social or technological complexes. Here we are, coming back around to what is referred to as the elder race, and some more information about them. And that's it. That's it for this session. So I thought the rest of this information was in this session. It must be in the next session. Oh, yeah. Okay, so you'll have to wait. This is a cliffhanger. There's going to be more information about the elder race, but here is another nugget of information. They developed in South America. Let's read that last sentence again. These entities were harvestable at the end of the second major cycle without ever having formed strong social or technological complexes. So if you think back to what we knew about the elder race earlier in the sessions, and what they've talked about as far as the harvestable entities. So remember, the first 25,000 year cycle, 0 entities were harvestable to the 4th density. At the end of the second 25,000 year cycle, there was a very small group of entities that were harvestable to the 4th density. That's all we've known about them so far. They refer to them as the elder race, and now we know that they were from South America, which once again will piss off a lot of people that study history and archaeology, because I don't even know if we have evidence that humans existed in South America like 75,000 years ago, or 50,000 years ago. I think, we're still figuring that all out. And anyway, exciting stuff. Let's review what we learned in this session. So, starting from the beginning, what did we learn today? What did we learn today? It's so weird that I can spend 40 minutes going over some information, and then when I have to go back to review it, I have no idea what I even talked about. Okay. But what was it? What is this first part? Let's skip ahead here. So Don's been trying to get through the 75,000 year cycle of time, and he's made it kind of to the second 25,000 year cycle, and that's what he's been asking questions about. So we did find out some more information about Maldek peoples, even though it was kind of a review. I feel like we understand it a little bit more. We talked about the quarantine. We definitely learned more stuff about reincarnation today. And then we also talked about some more of the human evolution. And right now my whole entire top of my head is tingling like crazy. So something's happening here as I stumble through trying to summarize. Tiny little bit more stuff about the Mars entities, but not a lot. The Confederation, talked quite a bit about the Confederation. The movement of people from Lemuria how they really moved through the Americas to Russia, not the other way around. Thought that was really interesting. And then we got a little bit of information about the elders, and I'm gonna go kiss your girl's my child if you can't hear her. Thanks for watching. Give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already. I'll see you later.